It's great to be here. This is actually my first time in Perth, even though I've been involved by distance and via the internet and phone calls and that sort of thing for a little while. I was able to do a bit of sightseeing yesterday in between the rain. We went up to Kings Park where we saw some nice sights and about 1,000 people playing Pokemon Go. And I was able to catch a Hitmonlee, and later on at lunch at Elizabeth Quay, as well as having the nice lunch and having another nice view and an idea of the bearings, I was also able to catch a sea king. And I guess my point there is it just goes to show you that you can be a hardworking and productive adult and still find time for video games and Pokemon. And I've also heard there might be a lure in the Pokestop next to the building later on for anyone who's interested in that. I'm talking about identity and independence today because for me, and I suspect many other autistic people growing up and trying to find their path in life and their place in the world, the process of working out who you are and how to get to where you want to go can be a challenging and a confusing one. As the Vice-Chancellor said earlier, autism is a lifelong journey. Identity is knowing who we are, as well as finding our place in society so we can live a good life, which is fulfilling, happy, and as independent as possible. This is not only fundamental to the aims of autism research in the area of adults, but it's also central to the hopes and aspirations of many parents and autistic people, regardless of their stage of life. In the ways that society tends to measure these things, you could say that I'm pretty successful. I've completed university, I have a full-time job in the public service in Canberra, and I live in a different state to my parents and live on my own. But at the same time, I've experienced a lot of challenges. I've had to work hard, and I don't necessarily do things in the same way that my peers do. I've been fortunate that I've been able to be very open about my autism at work. I'm valued and respected by my colleagues and by my superiors, but I can also feel very isolated at times in my life and find it difficult to connect with my local community, particularly when, at least up till now, one of the things I've yet to master is driving a car. But my identity as an autistic person and as a wider member of the autistic community transcends that local context. I know that even if I can sometimes feel lonely and misunderstood where I am, that I'm not alone. There is a diverse range of people out there who can understand and share some of my insights, my triumphs, my concerns and idiosyncrasies. I call myself autistic because it is a valued part of my identity. It colours how I think and experience the world. I'm not able to separate it out or remove its influence, both the advantages and disadvantages, from who I am. Being frustrated from something I cannot separate from myself is unproductive. It would only lead to regret and a damaged sense of self-worth. Whilst it's good to learn, to grow and to challenge yourself, you also need to accept and love who you are completely, including sometimes your limitations. Whilst I'd like to be better at some things, like being able to read social cues and not offend people by doing something I didn't mean to do, at the same time, I wouldn't like to lose my creativity, my work ethic, my love of learning, or any of the other bright and colourful threads of talent that autism has given me. The language people use in this area has been the subject of a long-standing debate, with recent research by the National Autistic Society in the UK failing to find any real consensus in the community's preferences as a whole. Some people prefer identity-first terms like autistic people, while others prefer person-first language such as people with autism. The survey found that autistic people themselves are much more likely to refer to themselves as autistic. Both groups, in my experience, choose the terms they do to try and bring value to people. And in my opinion, the language itself is less important than the attitudes and the respect behind it. People should remember to respect a person's individual choice about how they want to be identified themselves, even if it contradicts your preferences of how autistic people or people with autism should be referred to in general. A person's identity belongs to them. Other people we interact with influence who we are and what we become over time, but no one has the right to say who you are or to dictate how you identify yourself. A collaborative book has been written by members of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network in America. It's called Loud Hands, Autistic People Speaking. And they talk about a lot of these ideas. I'd just like to share a quote from one of the contributors, a woman named Penny Winter. "The core of autism is not an emptiness, but a unique way of being, of thinking and feeling, of relating and reacting to the world. In itself, this way of being has as much value, as much of a right to exist and to reach its full potential, and as much as to contribute as being neurotypical has. It is simply different. We are human beings. While I do believe that yes, we have a responsibility to act as responsibly and as politely as we can towards our fellow humans, we also have the right to simply be our true selves in all of our eccentric glory. At 28, I would consider myself well on the way on the life journey of finding identity and fulfilling my purpose. That is, the things I feel passionate about and being meaningfully connected to others. I was the oldest of 4 kids in a family that moved around a lot. My parents were both pretty shy, so there weren't a lot of expectations about socialising outside the family when I was young. As a young child, I was just seen as being very bright and very serious. In my first few years of school, I didn't have many friends, but I also wasn't really interested in making them. In my mind, school was about learning, not about other children, and all I wanted to do was learn. I was pretty perfectionistic and would struggle if I wasn't the best in anything that I valued, though I wasn't really interested in sport because I figured that that was just a way for the other kids to get rid of some of their excess energy and wasn't a real subject because it didn't have tests. Life for my family became a bit more stressful when my youngest brother was born. He didn't speak until he was 4.5 and mainly communicated by pointing and screaming until then. He loved lining up pegs on the clothes era, was afraid of rain and wind, and would only wear t-shirts with Thomas the Tank Engine or the Bananas in Pyjamas on them. He was misdiagnosed in a special kindergarten that catered to students with language delays and wasn't actually diagnosed with autism until he was in Year 7. At this point in my life, I was in early high school and had become a lot more interested in connecting to other people and confused about the increased social demands that come with adolescence. I wanted to fit in, but I didn't know how. I had poor judgment in people's intentions and identifying the right people to hang around with. Looking back, I could have had a really close group of friends, but at the time I wasn't able to tell which kids were genuine and accepting. A piece of career advice that really guided me as a teenager came from my Year 9 German teacher who said, think of 3 questions: what do you like, what are you good at, and what leads to jobs? This guided a lot of my thinking at that time. At 15, I left home to be a founding student at the Australian Science and Mathematics School based in Flinders University in Adelaide. This meant that I got to start transition to independence really early and had more time to learn and grow in this area incrementally, rather than being thrown into an expectation of complete independence all at once. At this school, more kids were motivated to learn. I was still one of the more serious and less social students, but I also had lots of opportunities to be involved. The school exposed me to lots of different areas of science that I liked and things I was good at, but the number of choices and things that people thought that I could do actually made making decisions very confusing. I felt like there was meant to be the perfect solution, and I was meant to know the right direction to go, and that if I didn't, that I would have been failing a lot of people. At different times, I wanted to do statistics, engineering, public health, space science, and probably 20 other things. It was also at this stage that my brother was diagnosed due to my parents wanting to put him in a more suitable schooling situation, which at that stage was actually him skipping the rest of Year 7 and jumping straight to high school, where he was already doing Year 10 maths. So after they got his diagnosis, my parents came home and handed me a list of autism symptoms and said, you know, what do you think? We think that you probably have Asperger's as well. But at that point, they weren't very keen on labels and didn't think anything would really be achieved by me getting a diagnosis, which I'm sure many of the parents in the room would know isn't always a very easy thing to get. But at that time I was questioning my identity, and why I was a little bit socially awkward, but because I wasn't really able to communicate that with my parents, I just kind of kept going with having this question above my head that I didn't really have a clear answer for either way. I was really successful in school and felt like I had an expectation on me to succeed in life and in whatever science area I chose fairly quickly. But I was overwhelmed by the choices in adult life and confused about who I was and what I wanted to do. This led to me being anxious and depressed and having trouble working out what I really thought and felt and how to separate that from what other people said and the pressure that I perceived as being put on me. It took me 2 attempts to complete university in 2 different degrees, and on the second attempt was where I was much more prepared and had a clearer idea of what I wanted to do. I studied psychology and did a subject less than a full course load to ensure that I was able to cope. It was during this attempt that I finally got my diagnosis. I was old enough to refer myself and in a position to pay for it. I went and argued why I didn't have autism, but walked out with the diagnosis anyway and wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Initially, I got a lot of negative responses from the people that I told, which put me off accepting myself and telling others. But after a year, I decided I could either let it be something that held me back or do my best to accept it and use it to make the world a better place. And by the fact I'm here today, I guess you can figure that I picked the second option. I was involved as a consumer representative in South Australia on a review of autism services, which exposed me to public administration and got me interested in working in the public service. I had a lot of doubts towards the end of uni about how I'd go finding a job. So what I ended up doing was applying for government graduate programs, what I thought would be a year early, so that while I was still at uni, and then surprised myself by getting in first try. Which was a bit of a surprise to me. I then moved to Canberra to work full-time, which I've been doing for 3.5 years, first living in share houses and then eventually on my own. I make choices to allow myself to be as independent as possible. I live where I can walk to my job, to the shops and to my church, and I rarely need a lift anywhere, but usually only when I'm going to the airport to go to an autism conference or home for Christmas, or when I need to go to the post office to collect a package that I can't carry on my own. I'm also studying a Master's in Disability Studies, and I'm involved in public speaking and leadership programs related to autism, as well as participating and consulting on research. To me, independence is about being able to make choices that let you be who you are and fulfilled regardless of whether you need help to do that or not. It's about accepting all of who you are and knowing what motivates you in pursuing it. For me, that's problem solving, being useful, being connected to people, as well as learning how people's minds work and hearing their stories. I use this knowledge to guide my choices about where my life is heading and what areas I try to focus on and grow in. At the same time, I also have a box full of sensory toys and a weighted blanket in my wardrobe. Some of the lessons that I've learnt through this process have been that you need to know what you need to be able to ask for it. People can take a while to develop this insight, and it can be useful to ask unthreatening questions to help people figure this out. It's okay to make an educated guess about the direction you want to go in, try it, and then reevaluate. No young adult or adolescent is fully independent. It's a long process for everyone. The things that we don't know may just be more obvious because parents are more aware that we will likely have a lot to learn. Don't take on too much to change about yourself all at once, or suggest too much for your child, sibling, or friend to do at once. To quote a random person who wrote an article on the internet named Shay Fett, change should make you bigger. It should make you stronger, clearer, more directed, more differentiated, more compassionate. The pain of growth is different from the pain of destruction. One will fill you with love and pride, even when it's hard, and the other will fill you with shame and fear. No one should use shame or fear to try and get you to change. You can solve a lot of things with communication, as long as the objective of both people is understanding. We generally like well-meaning, clear feedback given in a way that doesn't publicly embarrass us and only gives us 1 or 2 things to work on at once. It's important that people don't feel like they have so far to go, that who they are isn't valuable, and that the areas they've already grown in aren't significant. You don't have to be able to do things in the same way or in the same time period as others for it to be worthwhile. The goal of life is to authentically be yourself, not to try and imitate others or hide your true passions or personality, to try and find a false and temporary sense of acceptance. It may not happen overnight, but progress and growth can happen day by day and step by step, as well as we keep going and keep learning who we are and what motivates us. Thank you for listening, and I'll be around throughout the day if anyone has any questions.